Joining us now live from London, Vanessa Neumann. She is a special representative of the Juan Guido government in waiting in Venezuela. When he takes over, she will be the ambassador to the United Kingdom, and she's with us now. Vanessa, great to have you with us.
Great. Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be on with you. I'm gonna coalesce upon my name is usually pronounced Neumann. Neumann, I respond to. Neumann is really more correct, and now that it's being called out here in London a bit more often, I'm gonna insist on that. But always a pleasure to be on with you, John. How are you?
Vanessa Neumann.
Listeners?
I'm fine, thank you for asking. Vanessa Neumann, now that I got your name down, right? Because now that you're in a position of where you're going to be the ambassador to the UK with a new government, now we have to say your name right, which is Vanessa Neumann. Can't be saying Neumann.
They'll think it's somebody else.
I know, exactly, right? Now, Vanessa Neumann, let me just ask you this straight out. A lot of people thought the government of Maduro was going to fall weeks ago. It hasn't. Cuba is propping him up. The Russians are propping him up. There is really no chance that the U.S. is going to launch any sort of a military invasion. Trump basically put the kibosh on that in Tokyo this weekend. So how long does Maduro hang on? And now we understand that the Guido forces might be in direct negotiation with him. Can you expound on that within the framework of what you're able to say?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I want to be careful about getting ahead of the negotiations. Negotiations are always that. They always go forward, they go backwards, they go up, they go down. And it's kind of better to let them work it out in somewhat closed doors and not get ahead of events, not speculate too much about what will happen. What I can say is I can reinforce the position which our president, we call him the interim president, Juan Guido, has stated is that, and I can reinforce, is that we are prepared to enter into any good faith negotiations that respect our three-step plan, which is basically what we call the end of the usurpation, meaning Maduro has to get out because he is not recognized as having won the previous election. The end of the usurpation, a transitional government where we then negotiate who is a part of it, who gets what role and how that works out, what part of the military we keep, who's acceptable, who isn't, and then free and fair elections. And then, of course, that has to be with a cleansed roster of voters, of identity, which is a problem because under Chavez and Maduro, a lot of passports have been given out to people who aren't Venezuelans, namely terrorists. People who are legitimate Venezuelans have been erased. So it's a mess. So once we get that roster and a new electoral commission, so you can see that this is a multi-step process. The one thing that nobody wants is to go to elections with Maduro in power because he's a drug cartel capo, and he's a major human rights abuser, and he's a tyrant. So you can't really, to reinforce what the U.S. has said, is you can't go to elections with a tyrant. If you don't respect the rule of law and you don't respect democracy, there's really not much to talk about.
All right. A lot of people think, though, right now the U.S. has really botched this whole thing. I mean, there was a video put out by Juan Guido the other day, and he had, I think, 5 what looked like military personnel behind him. They looked like they were in very ill-fitting uniforms, like maybe they had just put those on. It didn't look credible. I thought that was a disaster for your efforts. But why now the change? I mean, a month ago, it looked like the Maduro government was just going to fall and he was going to flee to Havana. Now it looks like you're in direct negotiations. And part of the negotiation is, you said it's a 3-step plan. And the first part is Maduro has to go. So my question is, go where and who goes with him? What happens to the military leaders that are part of his operation, part of his government? What happens to them?
Right. Well, basically, the Maduro, of course, that's part of the sticking point. Is Maduro thinks he should stay in power. Nobody but Maduro basically thinks that, and even the people who are negotiating behind his back don't think that. So the conditions would be how much of his ill-gotten gains he gets to keep,
Right.
where he gets to go, what happens to his family and his children. We have it on fairly, decent authority that they do have an exit plan for his family. His family has an exit plan, and he needs to be encouraged to take it in a nonviolent way. We in the Guaido administration have always sought a peaceful transition of power. What we were attempting to do on April 30th and May 1st was, again, in accordance with the Constitution. There's clauses 333 and 350, where you have a rise up in civil disobedience, call upon the military to support the Constitution and support the people against forces that go against the Constitution and seize power. But it was supposed to be, a wave of people and a transition of power. They were supposed to decree that the National Assembly is the legitimate authority, etc. When that didn't happen, it is my view, and if you followed my career, you will know why I have this view, that one of the issues is how much money the military is making from their illicit trade. And you and I have discussed this on the show before. We have estimates from within Venezuela, from an economic analysis firm, that they estimate that the Venezuelan military is earning somewhere between $8.8 billion a year in illicit trafficking. Mm-hmm. So if they have been told by the Russians that, don't worry, we got you, because the Russian narrative is, we kept Assad in power, we can do the same with you. And keeping Maduro in power is important to the Russians, not just from a geopolitical standpoint, but also from money laundering. And the challenge is then trying to get them to understand that this can't last long, that the international community yoke will continue to close in on them, and it's now an international-led effort. We're hoping for a peaceful transition, but the conditions remain the same, which is Maduro has to go.
We're with Vanessa Neumann. She's the special representative of the Juan Guido interim government of Venezuela in the United Kingdom. She's live in London. And when President Guido is installed as the interim president of Venezuela, she will be the ambassador of Venezuela to the United Kingdom. So, Vanessa, it looked like, I'm just going to get back to this. I mean, several weeks ago, it looked like the entire Maduro military backing machine was collapsing in front of our eyes, that generals, high military officials were defecting. And, of course, as soon as that happens, that's the end of them. But then it was abetted, I guess. And now, so now you're in negotiations. And so I have to go back to, if you're Maduro, I mean, why not just fight and hang on? You know the U.S. is not going to invade, right? You already know that. So why would you step down?
Well, you would have to step down because, so the strategy from the international perspective, and this is not a secret because this has sort of been tweeted out by President Guaido, it has been written in editorials, is basically to get Russia, China, and Cuba to back away from Venezuela. China basically wants its debts honored and repaid by the new administration. Russia wants the same, and also probably wants to continue messing with the U.S. in its backyard. Project geopolitical power cheaply, but won't fight. And then the trick is to also get Cuba to back away, to make them realize that there will be just more and more punishment. So it's a strategy of carrot and stick, right? That step away from Venezuela, let Venezuela get transition back to democracy, stop propping up Maduro, because without the international support, Maduro will fall. And also with the blocking of the money and asset forfeiture and seizure, Maduro will fall. And this is something that I have been advocating for years, is that this is a drug cartel treated as such. It's a very different approach from military intervention. It's a very different approach from diplomatic negotiation. It's an approach of dealing with a drug cartel, which is what you target the leadership, you turn them, states' assets, state informants, which there's, again, a carrot and stick approach to that, and then you freeze their assets and you make it bad business. So, and you do the same with their supporters. And that's really what needs to happen. And it really needs to happen because the world needs to understand that these people don't govern. They function as a cartel. And if you understand that, then you know how to deal with them. And that's, again, not diplomatic and not military. It's a lot of law enforcement and for the international community to understand this and to exert their influence on Russia, China, and Cuba. And that hopefully is the approach that we are pursuing. As I said, Guido will continue to lead the people to rise up, to resist. There are also, ways to increase pressure and resistance from within the country that needs to continue so that the world can see that it is our will to get out from under this murderous dictatorship.
You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network, Trucking the Truth Across America. We are with Vanessa Neumann, and she is a special representative from the Juan Guaido potential interim government of Venezuela in the United Kingdom. So being in the UK and looking at the parliamentary elections yesterday for the EU, where a lot of the EU globalists went down, and now there's a rising movement bigger than ever now within the EU in order to get back to more sovereignty, individual nations, other countries like Poland wanting to pull out of Brexit, etc. Does that have any impact on the way EU is looking at Venezuela or some of the countries within Europe now?
That's a superb question.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. You're about the only person I know who would ask me that question. Yes, we track the elections in Europe very well because there's a whole bunch of us who are the representatives of Venezuela to various European countries. We're all over Europe. So we were tracking them closely to see who rose, who fell. All in all, it has been a net gain for our cause because what has happened is you have a lot of countries that a lot of political parties that were sort of allied or supporters of Maduro have fallen, and people who are more in favor of our constitution and our liberation from under this cartel are for us. You also have countries that will want to therefore accelerate our transition to democracy because they won't be. They also have a concern about immigration and an exodus. Spain has a huge Venezuelan population, followed by sort of Portugal and other European countries. And really, the best way, if you want to stop, the continued immigration from the Venezuelan exodus, is to get rid of Maduro. And in fact, we have a plan to rebuild the country, and we have a plan to get our diaspora back into Venezuela. It's called Vuelve a Casa, and return home, which is, come back to Venezuela after Maduro leaves, and you will have all sorts of incentives to do with housing, taxes, bringing your kids and your dog back, and all of that, right? So for us, we think that we will have a stronger position across the European Union, and stronger efforts to choke the finances of this cartel.
Now, what about the fact that one of the top courts in Venezuela a week and a half ago now, accused 4 opposition legislators of treason? What does that have any impact on the movement to get Maduro out, Vanessa?
Well, yes and no. So in the yes column is because basically he is going after the National Assembly, which is the internationally recognized last body of democracy left within Venezuela. We also have a Supreme Court that's basically all in exile. And they're all in exile because of death threats, right? I mean, one Supreme Court justice has just disappeared. In other words, was taken, never seen from again, or heard from again. So you have, so this is also what they're doing with the National Assembly members. We have about 18% of them are now currently either in exile, in prison, or being in exile, in prison, or overseas, or seeking refuge in or seeking refuge in foreign embassies inside Caracas, because, of course, that's sovereign territory. So it's a real attack on our democracy. So by the yes and the no, I mean that with the brutal crackdown on democracy and the crackdown on the will of the people, it really shows to the world what a brutal dictatorship this is. That it won't allow the people to have their elected representatives exert their will. And then, but also, of course, it's bad because it's much harder to run a government if you have people hiding in embassies, in exile, or in hiding. So that's a complicating factor, and that's also why we need the intercession of the international community.
Vanessa, give me a timeline.
Oh, that's a tough one. We're hoping that by the autumn this will crack. We're hoping that by the autumn, or certainly by the end of the year. This can't hold much longer. I mean, I know I say that, but the resistance and the resilience of the Venezuelan people has just been amazing to deal with spiraling inflation, where basically money is worthless, with 4 days of blackouts in a row. People are desperate and increasingly angry. I think that by the autumn this will be so untenable and so horrifying to the international community, even to Europe, which has been so naive about understanding the brutal and evil nature of the Maduro regime, that I think that by then there will have to be a solution. But as I said, the solution is get them out, encourage them to get on an airplane out. It has to be about the top 10 or 12 people around him, and we need the will to break their back financially. Of the individuals.
And that's part of the negotiation, is to find a way to get him out with his family and his, top 10, 15 people, to get them out in order to have a peaceful
without a war, without a civil war.
Right. In order to have a peaceful transition. I mean, that makes sense. I think that's clear to our listeners now why Juan Guaido has entered into negotiations to try to make this work. Final question, then I know we both have to go. Final question. We're going to get a new government in the United Kingdom. Will a change in power at the prime minister level affect the status at all of Vanessa Neumann in the UK as special representative for Juan Guaido government?
Oh, thank you. Well, I think, I don't think it'll be a negative. It's either neutral or a positive. I'll tell you why. Because the change in prime minister will come from within the Conservative Party. So this is not a general election. It's not going to go... the new prime minister won't be Jeremy Corbyn, for instance, won't be from the Labour. They're choosing from within their own political party. They are likely to be somewhat rather conservative. The current foreign secretary is one of the candidates, Jeremy Hunt. He's been very good on the issue of Venezuela. He might become prime minister. We don't know. At any rate, whoever does become prime minister will be conservative. And the sooner that the Brexit issue gets resolved, the better it will be for them to pay more attention to Venezuela again. It's in the UK, a lot of the political energy goes to dealing with Brexit at the moment. So it's either a neutral or a positive for me and my battle for my country with a new prime minister.
Great segment, Vanessa Neumann. Thank you for your time today. So enlightening. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, John. Always a pleasure. Anytime.
Vanessa Neumann, special representative of the Juan Guaido potential interim government of Venezuela in the United Kingdom. Thanks for being with us.